Hi guys, Mark here. Welcome. Today we're tying a Norton knot on a pinned mandrel. This knot is big enough to cover a pool ball. Here we have a Norton knot still on the mandrel. You can see that it has a distinct zigzag pattern similar to the gaucho knot. The interweave cord does not exit the knot on either side. It turns around before exiting the knot. When you're finishing a sequence with an under, such as here, with our interweave cord, so under, we start our next one with an over. When you finish your sequence with an over, such as the interweave cord here, we start with an under. So when you finish under, you start over. When you finish over, you start under. We're going to tie our knot on a 10-pin mandrel. So we have 10 pins on the top side, 10 pins on the bottom side. The diameter of our mandrel is about the same as our pool ball. We have a rubber band or a hairband here on the left, which is going to hold the two standing ends of our cords. To prepare my mandrel, I'm going to mark one of my pins at the bottom as 1. Then, at the top, we're going to find pin number 6. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. We are tying our knot out of 2 strands of Paracord 550. Our base knot is going to require about 11 feet of cord. The interweave needs a bit less, so 10 feet. We're going to need a pool ball to cover, and finally a lacing needle. We begin tying with the longer out of our 2 cords. This one is 11 feet long. Pass one end under the rubber band near pin 1. Attach a lacing needle onto the other end. From pin 1 on the left, pass to pin 6 on the right. From our pin on the right side, pass to the next pin on the left. So, to pin number 2. We passed over 1. From our pin on the left side, pass to the next pin on the right. Again, going over 1. We now pass to the next pin on the left. Since we now have 2 cords to go through, we begin under, then continue over. We pass to the next pin on the right, again encountering 2 strands, so we're going to pass under, then over. We now pass to the next pin on the left. We now have 3 strands to go through. So we pass over, under, over. So we're always keeping an under 1 over 1 sequence. From our pen on the left, we move to the next pen on the right, repeating the same sequence as we did before, so over, under, over. From right to left, we again travel to the next pen on the left side. With 4 strands, we need to begin under, then over, under, and over. From the left side towards the right, to the next pen, doing the same sequence as before. So under, over, under, over. From the right side, we pass to the next pen on the left. We now have a total of 5 strands to go through. So we begin over, under, over, under, over. Always keeping the same over 1, under 1 sequence. From left to right, traveling to our next pen, we repeat the same sequence we used before. So over, under, over, under, over. From right to left, we now begin under, then over, under, over, under, over. From left to right, to the next pen, repeating the same sequence we used before. Under, over, under, over, under, over. From right to left, we now begin over, then under, over, under, over, under, over. From left to right, we repeat the same sequence. From right to left, we begin under, then continue with an over 1 under 1 sequence. From left to right, we repeat the same sequence, starting with an under, then continuing over, under, and so on. From right to left, we now begin with an over, then continue under, over, and so on. From left to right, again start with an over, then under, over, under, and so on. We are now at our final pass. Using up our last pin on the right, we begin under, then continue over, under, and so on. The 11-part 10-byte Turk's head. Place your working end alongside the standing end and feed your working end under the rubber band. Maybe slightly adjust your knot so that you get some even spacing. We are now continuing with the interweave. Grab the shorter out of your 2 cords. This one is 10 feet long. Pass one end under the rubber band alongside the standing end of our first cord. We begin by traveling under 2 alongside our first standing end. Then continue an over 1 under 1 sequence. Reaching the right side with an under, we turn around without exiting the knot on the right side, so we finished under, we begin over. So over, then under, over, under, and so on, to the left side. On the left, our sequence finishes at an over before exiting the knot. So since we finished over, we re-enter with an under. Then continue with an over one, under one sequence, all the way to the right. Again, finishing our sequence at an under. Since we finished under, we begin over. This time, over these two strands. So over two, then under, then continue with your over one, under one sequence. Finishing on the left with an over. Since we finished over, we re-enter with an under. Under one, splitting a pair of parallel strands. Then we continue over two, under, over under, and so on, continuing our over one, under one sequence to the right side. Finishing with an under, we start with an over. This time, we have two sets of parallel strands to split. So we begin over two, under two, then continue with your over one, under one sequence. Finishing on the left side with an over. Finishing with an over, we begin with an under. So under one to split parallel strands, then continue over two, under two, then continue with your over one, under one sequence. Finishing on the right with an under. On the right, since we finished with an under, we begin with an over. Over two, to split a pair, under 2 to split a pair, over 2 to split a pair, then continue your under 1 over 1 sequence. Finishing on the left with an over. On the left, since we finished with an over, we begin with an under, splitting a pair of parallel strands. Then we continue over 2, splitting a pair, under 2 to split a pair, over 2, then continue your under 1 over 1 sequence. Finishing on the right with an under. Since we finished under, we begin over. This time, we have 4 pairs of parallel strands to split. So, over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2, then continue with your over 1, under 1 sequence. Finishing on the left with an over. On the left, we finished over, so we begin under. Splitting our first pair of parallel strands. Then continue over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2, and continue with your over 1, under 1 sequence. Finishing on the right side with an under. Since we finished with an under, we begin over. This time we have 5 pairs to split. So over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2, then continue your under 1 over 1 sequence. Finishing on the left with an over. Since we finished with an over, we continue our next sequence starting under, splitting a pair, then we continue over 2 to split a pair, under 2 to split a pair, over 2 to split a pair, under 2, then over 2, and continue with your under 1 over 1 sequence. Finishing on the right, as always, with an under. Since we finished under 1 on the right, we begin with an over. This time we have yet another additional pair to split. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2, then continue with your over 1, under 1 sequence, finishing on the left with an over. On the left, we begin again with an under 1, then we continue splitting pairs. Over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2, then we continue over, under. Since we finished under, we begin over. This time, we have a total of 7 pairs to split. So over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2, under 2, over 2, under, over. Since we finished over, we begin with an under. We then continue over to under 2, splitting pairs to the right side. Finishing on the right with an under. We now have an additional pair to split. Since we finished with an under, we begin over. Over 2 to split a pair, under 2 to split a pair, and so on, all the way to the left. Finishing on the left with an over. We begin our next sequence with an under, then continuing over to under 2, splitting pairs all the way to the right side. Finishing our sequence under 2. We are now at our final pass. we begin over 2, then under 2, and so on, splitting pairs towards the left side. Finishing our sequence, going over 1, then under 1, alongside the standing end of our second chord. So at this point, we have a lovely zigzag pattern in our Norton knot. Before transferring our knot off of our mandrel onto our pull ball, we're going to do one more thing. We're going to run our 2 working ends deeper into our knot to about the center point. So let's say up to here. So you run one end a bit further to the center, then you bring the standing end out like this. So 2 ends coming from the center, we repeat with our first chord. The working end simply follows the standing end deeper into the knot. Let's say up to here. We bring the standing end out like this, and we now have 4 strands that we can use to braid any sort of a braid that we want. So maybe a 4-stranded braid, maybe add a couple of more strands. For now, remove your pins, then we're going to transfer our knot. Transfer your knot onto your pull ball. Shape up the knot. Begin tightening up at one of the ends. Let's say this one here. Go through the knot, picking up slack and pulling it into the other end. After tightening our first strand, we're going to begin the second one. Make sure, when tightening, to have the 2 numbers on the sides lined up. So this one is at the center, this one should also be at the center. When tightening up, everything should be lined up around here and around here. So again, we start at one end, going through our knot into the other end. So guys, this concludes our tutorial on covering a pool ball using a Norton knot. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to see you in my future videos as well.